Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be. My name is Sean. I'm delighted you are joining us for today's ESBC community webinar. Today I'm joined by Emma Claire Shaw, who will cover how to successfully adopt Power Platform at scale, Central Government UK. We love hearing what you guys have to say, so remember to join in the conversation about today's webinar and more. Our handle is @ESBC_community and our hashtag is #ESBC25. Tweet us, tag us, and tell us what you learned. Don't forget to check out our Learning Hub, which is updated with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. You can access and view the Learning Hub by visiting our website, sharepointeurope.com, and clicking the Content tab at the top. Don't let the learning stop here. Continue to keep up and stay ahead by joining us for our next webinar. Understanding Power Platform Certifications. How to prepare, train, and pass certification exams with Yossi Run, MVP. This webinar will take place Wednesday, 29th of January, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. CET. For more information on this webinar, please check out www.sharepointeurope.com/register for webinars. Elevate your Microsoft Power Platform skills at the European Power Platform Conference in Vienna on the 16th to 19th of June 2025. Power Platform Week attendees get €150 off tickets with code Power Platform Week, valid until February 7th. Learn from the latest in Power Apps, Power Automate, and Dynamics 365 while connecting with experts and peers. Scan the QR code to register now or visit www.sharepointeurope.com/European Power Platform Conference. Don't miss our 2-for-1 sale for Falcon Europe, available February the 5th only. Register now to get 2 participants for the price of 1. More perspectives, more networking, and more opportunities. Act fast. This offer is for 1 day only at www.sharepointeurope.com/Falcon Europe 2-for-1 deal. Share your expertise at ESBC 25. The ESBC 25 call for speakers is now open. Share your knowledge and connect with industry leaders and showcase your expertise in Microsoft 365, Azure, Copilot, SharePoint, Microsoft Teams, or Power Platform at Europe's premier Microsoft 365 and Azure conference. Submit your sessions today at www.sharepointeurope.com/submit-speak-ESBC. As always, if you have any questions at any stage, please feel free to type in the questions box and Emma will get to them during the webinar. This webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Center, where you'll be notified by email when it's available. And now, I'm going to pass you over to today's webinar presenter, Emma. Hello, Emma. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for inviting me to present.
No worries at all.
So I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully that will work without resetting my webcam like it was earlier.
Yeah, I can see your screen there, Emma.
Perfect. Bear with me. Let me just make sure I got the view right. Cool. Thank you so much, everyone who has joined the webinar today. I really appreciate you coming to listen to me talk about my experiences implementing Power Platform here at Defra Group. So this presentation is going to be around how to successfully adopt Power Platform at scale. Like I say, this is based on my experiences in my role here at Defra Group. I'll tell you a little bit more about Defra Group, who we are and what we do, and my role in just a sec. So, there we go. So I am a proud Power Platform product manager. I've been doing this role since January 2022, so just over 3 years. And we'll cover where things are at when I joined in just a moment. I've been a fan of this technology since 2018, and I've got to admit, when I first thought back to when that was, I thought that was quite impressive. It sounded like quite a long time ago. But once you get more embedded in the community and meet more of the other specialists around the technology, you realise actually that is no time at all, and I'm a relative newbie, given how far back Dynamics goes and some of the other technology that sits underneath the platform. But regardless, my previous role was in technology innovation. My job was looking at new technology that might have an impact on Defra going forward and looking at how that might help us move forward with our organisational goals. And Power Apps was one of the technologies I explored in that role. Ran a pilot of the technology against a few of our business use cases. We do an awful lot of things like case management and mobile forms, and it gave us the ability to do those things much more efficiently and easily. And off the back of that, I made some recommendations that we move forward with adopting the platform, and then 4 years later got lucky enough to take it forward myself. So that's been my journey into the platform. Some of the things I'm interested in, I mean, obviously it would be a long list if I put them all in there, but I'm really interested in science fiction and fantasy, so books, films, TV. So if you've got any recommendations, please chuck them my way, and if you need any recommendations, then give me a shout. But I'm also really, really interested in how technology can improve the world we live in, and that's why I'm doing this role in the public sector. Please do find me on LinkedIn. If you've got any questions after the session today, I'm more than happy to have a conversation outside of this forum, or if you've got those book or film recommendations. And I've also got a link in here and at the end of the presentation to the UK cross-government community of practice for Power Platform. So this is a year or two old now, this community. It exists on Slack and also has a regular virtual meeting as well. So if you're in the public sector or central government in the UK, please do come and join our community. So what will you learn from this session today? So a few things. So the technology is the easy bit relatively. I mean, I know there's a few webinars this week that go much more deep into the technology than this one, but really the key thing here, it's about people and it's about getting that change and adoption right. It's a long-term journey. This is not a project. This is a product that needs long-term management. So if, like us, you were burnt implementing Microsoft 365, thinking you could drop it like on-prem and move on, this is not the case. This needs to be managed as a product, and you need to be thinking about that long-term picture. I recommend taking a continuous user and stakeholder view, and we'll talk about that an awful lot as we go through the presentation. It is important to continually prioritise what you're focusing on. So unless you have got the luxury of a huge team, you'll need to prioritise what you're looking at week by week in order to make sure that you're moving things forward and focusing on the right areas. I've got some ideas in here for how you sustainably enable your community. So we'll go through those a little bit later. I don't know why I came up with a phrase that was such a tongue twister. And the key thing that's going to come up probably 7 or 8 times as we go through these slides is that people are the most important aspect for long-term success. So both building the right team for that long-term journey, but also bringing people on board and keeping them on board for that adoption journey. So a bit more about Defra. So Defra stands for the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. Defra is a central government department in the UK. It's responsible for all of the policy around the environment, food and rural affairs. And we're a little bit of a strange government department because we've also got 5 of our arm's length bodies which sit as part of our organisation. So all of our what we call corporate services are delivered to that group of 6 organisations. And really those other 5 arm's length bodies that sit underneath us, they're the parts of the government that are doing the doing. So they're implementing the policy in those various different parts of the environment for the most part. And part of the thinking behind bringing those organisations together, and why I always mention this when I'm talking about our journey adopting the platform, is that the reason why we brought those organisations together is that they deliver a lot of the same business capabilities across different parts of the natural environment. And part of the thinking of bringing them together was not only that they're delivering those same business capabilities and we don't want to be spending money on the same IT systems for all of those different organisations, but also the fact that we have got the same customers. So for example, farmers are customers for at least 4 of these organisations. So having that single customer view instead of all of us working in silos and just looking at it from the policy perspective is really critical. So we're about 30,000 employees across those 6 organisations, and we share one Microsoft 365 tenancy. So all of the work that I've done here has been for all of these customers. On day 1, when I came into this role 3 years ago, we installed the starter kit just to have a little look at what was going on under the hood. And to my absolute horror, in the moment, we had 1,200 apps and over 2,500 flows in the tenancy, and that was growing. So we thought we'd actually turned off Power Apps, and the more I work in this area, the more I see this is a very common story. So you think you've turned off Power Apps, but actually people are finding other ways into it, because there's a few different ways in, aside from that kind of main front door from the main navigation. So what you tend to find is that there will be people tinkering in there, even if you thought they weren't. Our usage was largely ungoverned, so we only had a single Power Platform admin who was occasionally picking up on things if people kind of rose to the top or asked specific questions around how they might use things. But it was very time intensive, that approach, and there was no way we were going to be able to scale that into our business community or even scale it for our IT-led projects, because we just didn't have enough of a foundation to be able to treat projects equally and deliver them and get those efficiencies that the platform can offer us. On the plus side, we knew there was going to be loads of value with using the technology. So the fact that we had all of these early adopters there was a great thing, really, because it showed us that there was a need for the technology and there were people that were keen to get up and running and use it. We also had an awful lot of knowledge fragmentation, so across our developer community, but also within our IT department, there wasn't really a strategy or an agreement in terms of what we were trying to do with the platform and what people were allowed to do with the platform. So just to touch on some of those main challenges coming into this role then, with the context of that last slide in mind. So we didn't have any leadership or strategy around the technology. So we had multiple stakeholders and diverse users coming from different areas of our IT department and our much wider business, but no one really had the bandwidth or the remit to lead it. So no one was really clear on what the technology was for, why we should use it, and how we should govern and manage it going forward. There was a lack of guidance for developers, so we weren't really giving our developers any direction on what the tools were and weren't for, and that stands for the IT projects as well as the business makers. So we weren't providing them with those processes, we weren't giving them the guidance, so we were at high risk of people building the wrong things on the platform. We'd also had Power Automate turned on for a bit and then turned on, and people weren't able to go back and fix their flows. So it was all just a bit of a car crash, to be quite honest. Our security team were really concerned about particularly the use of Power Automate, which I think is quite common. So very concerned that data might be moving outside of our tenancy in large amounts without us realizing it. I think the security side can be quite concerning to start with, but once you kind of unpick it and look at what's available, it's actually reasonably easy to manage and reasonably easy to assuage that risk. I was surprised at how easily we actually brought those security guys on board when it came to it.
Emma, just a question there, if that's okay. Sorry,
yeah, of course.
Disrupt, yeah. Question is, what percentage of your user base have premium licenses?
Oh, that's a really good question. So we actually have pretty much site-wide licenses now. When we started, we had barely any. And I think that's quite common. People start with the basic functionality, and then as the maturity grows, the offer grows as well. I think when it comes to the IT-led projects, pretty much all of them have premium licenses and needed them from the start. But with the business maker community, we started with that more simple approach. There are some real gotchas if you don't have premium licenses. Maybe this will be covered in that session on licensing later on in this series, but there's some pretty fundamental connectors that aren't included in the standard package. So you might want to consider your approach to that and having those available as you mature.
Perfect, thank you, Emma.
So another concern, and this one was particularly among IT stakeholders, is the proliferation of shadow IT, or grey IT, depending on your terminology. So we've probably all experienced this before with tools like Access and really complicated Excel sheets, where the business build their own solutions, they become business critical, and then that developer leaves. It's not documented. And then they come to IT and want them to fix it. So it's happened before, we've experienced it, and when we're developing the service wrapper around this tool and the product offer around it, we need to think about those concerns and how we alleviate them. And I guess one of the main things on that is, we can see what people are doing, not everything they're doing, but an awful lot more. And by automating that monitoring, we can be really proactive about keeping an eye on what people are doing with the platform. And we'll go through some of the things we can use to do that in a sec. And then the last one is shipwrecked solutions. So this is a term I came up with myself. We often talk about orphan solutions in Power Platform, but I don't think the fact they're orphaned is the biggest risk. The biggest risk of an orphan solution is that it goes out of date or breaks. So you have these solutions that have been abandoned by the developers because they've moved on or left. The solutions got eroded over time, broken down over time. Perhaps there's been some feature updates. And they're shipwrecked. They've been left behind, they've had no love, they've had no support, and now the business want IT to come and fix them. So how do we ensure that we don't end up with all that landing on IT, and how do we avoid those problems kind of proliferating? So now we'll move on to the sunnier side of things, the things that we can actually do to ensure the successful adoption and ensure that these things do not remain problems. So I've said it a couple of times already, but getting this right really is all about people. Oh, backwards by accident, sorry about that. Now you get to see the reveal all over again. I want this picture to stay in your mind, this sort of human pyramid type formation. So everyone's got a role in that formation. Some of them are supported by others. Some of them are holding each other's up. Some of them are holding other people up. Some of them are very committed to being in this position. And some of them are just leaning in or showboating, to be quite honest. Getting this right, it really is all about people. And the first thing is bringing in your users and stakeholders. And the second half is about maintaining the right team to deliver what's needed, which takes an awful lot of planning on both sides. So just thinking about the stakeholders, and there's some examples in this picture here. So they've all got a kind of different perspective on what's needed. Your IT projects are going to want to know how they deliver on the platform, what governance routes they need to follow. The architects on those projects might want to know about licensing and what connectors they can use and how they can request new ones. So you're going to need processes for all of these things. IT stakeholders, so I mentioned already, they might take a little bit more convincing that the tool set should be opened up. They're probably concerned about that shadow IT challenge we talked about on the last slide. They might also be concerned about people using the right tools for the right job. And then on the other side here, we've got those business stakeholders. So the makers, they might want to know what the limits are on what they can build, or what support's available if they get stuck trying to build something. Why isn't a feature working that they've come across in online training? That one comes up an awful lot, unfortunately. And then you've got your business stakeholders. So they might be worried about makers using the wrong data or building tactical solutions when they've already got a strategic one on the way. So essentially, you've got an awful lot of people to loop in here and a lot of organisational and user needs to fold into your strategy. So I think the key thing here is knowing who those stakeholders are, knowing who your users are, and really making sure you don't forget the business, because when we're talking about democratising IT through using low code like Power Platform, the business are taking on some of that responsibility to manage the things that they build going forward. And if you don't loop them in, if you haven't made them a part of shaping that offer, and if you don't have that continuous feedback loop with them, they're going to feel like this has been pushed on them, and adoption just isn't going to work in the same way. So it's really important to have that picture and to have those feedback loops built in. So yeah, talk to people, start building feedback loops, and just remember you're here for the long haul. So this is a product that you're going to be managing for as long as you use the tool set, and it's not a project. So you need to have those lines of sight with those stakeholders set up. So moving on to how you kind of start this journey and how you can approach this. So the people that were working with me in the first 18 months, they'll know the mind blown emoji has been used an awful lot by me. There is so much to think about when implementing the platform, and there's so many areas that you could choose to focus on. And on top of that, there's already loads to think about, but on top of that, the cascade of new features will not stop. And you know, this is a great thing because there's loads of stuff being improved and added to all the time. There's loads of new things to think about, but it's also terrifying because there's already so much to do, and how do you keep an eye on those things and fold them in as you go. So My recommendations would be to regularly review your maturity. So this is not going to be, there is no full definition of done here. You can always be assessing where you're at and looking at yourselves compared to other organisations, and perhaps even having some sort of regular model that you assess yourself against and benchmark yourself against. I recommend looking at case studies, so looking at what other organisations have done. There's some really great ones on Gartner if you've got a account there, but also networking. So I've got a link at the back of the slide deck to the Dynamics 365 and Power Platform user group directory. There are loads of user groups all across Europe and the US. Go and check them out. There will be one not far from you. You can go along to those and have a chat with people, and it might help open your eyes or overcome some of the challenges that you're experiencing. So it's a really friendly community, and I really recommend joining it and being a part of it to help get insights on your problems. Review Microsoft recommendations. And the reason why I put that in italics is there's some great content on Microsoft Learn, and some of that really is the benchmark for how you might want to get things right. But there's also some success stories on there which will just not be relevant to you, depending on what your business is and what your organisation does. So I guess what I'm saying is take some of it with a pinch of salt, because there might be a different way of approaching it, and there might be some gotchas in there that aren't necessarily highlighted on the Microsoft website. So just make sure that you're considering other sources of information as well as the stuff on the Microsoft site. I've said it a few times already, but make sure you're keeping those organisation and stakeholder needs front and centre. So when you're thinking about how to prioritise what you look at or new features coming through and whether you should consider those, just make sure you're looking at it through that lens and that you're thinking about your organisation, where you're at in terms of maturity and how you might be able to use it. So just because there's a feature there doesn't mean you need to use it. Luckily, a lot of the new features are making it easier to manage, so hopefully they will help you. And then just a last point on here, so that hopefully will help you stop panicking when you're embarking on this journey, or if you're trying to improve where you're at right now. Make sure you're thinking about how you utilise support and knowledge beyond your organisation as well as within it. There are some amazing partners out there that can help you on your journey. We've used a couple here in Defra Group, and without them we definitely wouldn't be where we are now in terms of adoption and maturity. So think about how you can utilise support beyond your organisation, but also think about that long-term resourcing picture. So there's an awful lot of roles you're going to need to make this work, and there's an awful lot of skills that you're going to need in the team that you might not necessarily have today. So it's thinking about how you can bring those people in later on, or how you can potentially use a partner to augment your organisational knowledge. And remember, it's all about people. There it is again. So now I'm going to go through what I see as the 3 pillars of successful adoption, and I'm going to go a little bit into some of the headline things to think about within those 3, and then from there we'll talk a bit more in depth about change and adoption and the things you can do. So the 3 pillars as I see them are the strategic foundation, the technical foundation, and then the change and adoption piece. And the key thing I wanted to draw out on this slide really is that just to know that only one of these is about technology, just that middle one. So the technology is the easy bit to some degree. And then the last point on this one, just remember that there is no definition of done. You will need to continuously evolve this strategy as you move forward. So some of the headlines within each of those areas. So just some key things to think about, and you could potentially use this as a way of benchmarking where your organisation is currently, if you've got all these boxes checked in terms of what you've got set up. So the first thing is having a product lead, so having someone who is responsible for the technology and responsible for the strategy around the technology, the resourcing around the technology, essentially owning the platform for the long term. The next one is really thinking about the business capabilities that your organisation wants Power Platform to deliver on for them. So this is thinking about your organisational goals and the requirements, that the enterprise architecture, and where Power Platform falls within that. And then from there, setting up some architectural guardrails that will make it easier for projects and business makers to decide if Power Platform is the right solution for them. Another thing I'd recommend once you've got those business capabilities is just having a little look at the other low-code application platforms that are out there. So there's some other great products out there. Gartner certainly predicts that most organisations will have more than one low-code platform in their estate. You might already have more than one. Here at Defra, we've currently got 4. And they're all useful for different things. They've all got a sweet spot, so it's worth just considering that overall, I suppose, application strategy around which tools you're using for what. The next one is adaptive governance. So particularly if you're opening up to business makers, you will need an adaptive governance model. So this is a way of assessing solutions by the scope and risk they pose to the organisation, and then determining what process that solution will need to follow into delivery, depending on the risk it's posing, so which category it falls into in the model. Here at Defra, we've got 3 categories. I'm more than happy to share that model with people if they would like to see it, so do contact me. So within our model, we've got 3, and we only allow our business makers to develop in the bottom 2 categories. And for some certain functionality, they need to also prove that they've done training and things like that. So it gets kind of more complicated as you move along in maturity, but having that framework there and then reviewing it as you move forward is really critical. The next one is resourcing plans. So I've talked a little bit about this already, but just having that long-term resourcing picture, thinking about what you're going to need going forward. So the technical foundation, a few things in here. We've got the environment strategy. So just very briefly, if you're not familiar with this, if you think of your tenancy as a house, environments are like rooms in that house. You can set rules for what is and isn't allowed in each room, and your environment strategy will directly link to your adaptive governance model. So that will help determine what environment things can be built in. You've then got the security piece. So just a couple of things to mention on this one, and actually linking to the environment strategy, you want to make sure you've got your security roles nailed down. So what security role different user personas should have assigned to them, so that we make sure they're not doing anything crazy. And then other things in security, the key one would be enabling tenant isolation. So Michael talked about this yesterday. It comes up an awful lot now. Going forward, Microsoft are going to enable this by default. But if you've already got exceptions, it will also automatically set up exception policies. So just be aware that is coming by default. And if you haven't got it enabled, would recommend that you do. And then DLP stands for data loss prevention policies. So that's essentially deciding what connectors are and aren't allowed in your tenancy. And one gotcha on that is I would recommend tweaking the setting around what happens to new connectors when they get added. So the default is that they go into the non-business category, but you might want to change that so that they're automatically blocked depending on the risk appetite in your organisation. Pro dev capability, so you might be thinking, well, we don't have any pro dev capability and we don't really need it because we're going to outsource all our development. But if you're opening up to business makers, you probably are going to want some pro dev capability in your organisation, perhaps just one lead developer who can help guide business makers to follow the right standards and principles. And then the next one, so I would recommend, again, if you're opening up to business makers, that you have some maker standards, so some design policies that you encourage people to stick to. I'm sure anybody already using the platform will have seen some crazy Canvas apps in their time. It's possible to build pretty terribly designed Canvas applications that still work. And it's really easy to make them inaccessible. So just something to be aware of. Setting some standards around that, really useful, and then also providing training. And this has been a really hot topic here at Defra because we certainly started our journey thinking that Microsoft Learn content would be enough. Obviously there's some great training content on Microsoft Learn, but it just doesn't work for everybody, online training. So what we've now done is opened up some face-to-face courses, which we're not running ourselves, we're outsourcing that, but those are now available to business areas that want to invest the time in going in and doing those face-to-face courses. So just worth thinking about the different ways you can approach that. Next one, or final one on the technical foundation, and I should say these aren't exhaustive lists, obviously, this is just the kind of fundamentals. The Centre of Excellence Starter Kit. So this is a tool that is supported and maintained by the PowerCat team. I used the little fairy icon for this because my hope was that it would come in and wave a magic wand and sort out all my governance issues. Clearly this isn't the case. This is a starter kit. The answer is on the box. There's loads of really useful stuff in there. There's loads of useful data in there. It's huge if you install it all, so you'll want to plan and prioritize and pick the right bits for your governance strategy, and you'll also want to customize it. And here in Defra, one of my principles around the service that I've set up has been to automate as much of this as possible. We're under immense budget constraints currently and immense resourcing constraints, so automating as much as possible has been really, really critical. So we've built loads of cool stuff on top of it that really just takes the grunt work out of managing the platform. And then finally, change in adoption. So we're going to talk about this a lot more, but just some of the headlines: having a place to go for people to find out information about using the platform. So we called ours the Power Platform Hub. There is a template site for this that the PowerCat team have also released, but essentially that site's got signposts to training, to our community. It's got success stories from real business areas so that people can see the kind of things other people have developed. And it's been really useful just to have that single place. And one thing I would recommend is, if you are going to do that, make sure you've got the bandwidth to keep it up to date, add news stories, make it feel alive so that people don't go to it and think this hasn't been updated for ages. Doesn't seem like these people are staying on top of this. Tell them and tell them and tell them again. So this really is around having a comms and engagement plan, making sure you're reminding people what's there and doing that at a pace that your organisation can handle. Sponsors. So you've got your IT stakeholders and your business stakeholders, hopefully by this point. So making sure those people are cited, making sure that you're looping them in. And we'll talk about that a bit more on the next slide. Community of practice, this has been really critical to us here at Defra. So I've mentioned that we're under immense budget and resourcing constraints. There's no way that we could have our business make a community if we had to answer every technical question that they've got. So we have got a community of practice on Viva Engage that meet once a month virtually as well. And what we tend to find, although we do have a couple of developers who drop in and check the questions are getting answered, what we tend to find is that other people in the community pick them up much quicker than we do. So what we're seeing now is that although we are an IT department that is facilitating and leading that community, it's very much kind of looking after itself to some degree on the day-to-day, which is invaluable really. We wouldn't be able to do this without that. And then finally, benefit tracking. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later on, but obviously it's important to think about the KPIs for this to prove to those senior IT stakeholders that you are getting value out of it. Benefit tracking's been a bit tricky to get to the bottom of, but I've got a solution and I'll talk about that a bit in a moment. And then just a reminder, the golden thread through all of this is your organisational and user needs. So keeping those front and centre when you're designing this will help you to have successful adoption because you're building the right thing to suit your organisation as much as possible. So we're going to focus on change and adoption now. So I want to steal an analogy from Andrew Bibby, who is presenting on Thursday, hopefully not talking about the same subject, sorry Andrew. He used a great analogy last year at the European Power Platform Conference around taking people on a bus ride. So you're taking your organisation on a journey when you democratise IT via low-code platforms. So you've got people getting on the bus at various points in that journey, and you need to look after them. So your early adopters, they're probably going to be the people that get on the bus first. They're probably going to be super, super keen to be on the bus when they see there's someone finally looking after the bus. So make sure you're looking after those people that get on first, communicate with them regularly, hear their requirements as they mature and evolve on their journey. You'll also need to be prepared for all the other people that are getting on the bus along the way. And some of those might be a little bit reluctant to get on the bus, some of those business sponsors, some of those IT stakeholders that are particularly worried about it. So think about the differing requirements, think about how you onboard them if they're going to be using the technology themselves, and brief them on what's available. So keep revisiting what you've provided them and make sure that you're giving them the right things to suit their needs. So Here, I guess the key thing is that a comms plan is essential, again, making sure you know what you're doing in terms of reaching out to people. And was there anything else on those bullets I haven't mentioned? So just make sure people are on board and cited. And then I guess just the final thing, that thing in bold there, just be aware of your own capacity. So when we first had our Centre of Enablement set up, I was very keen that we didn't shout it from the rooftops, because we wanted to make sure it was working first for the people that already understood the tools, and then we very much scaled from there. And this year we're hoping to get some more funding, and then we will be more shouting it from the rooftops. So I think go at a pace that you're able to handle within your team, keep thinking about people and keep thinking about resourcing.
Emma, we just have a question there, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Now, so what were the most significant challenges faced during Power Platform adoption at scale? How were they overcome?
You know what, I've got a slide on that. I think it's the one after this. So I think we'll probably cover that in a sec.
Yeah, perfect.
So just some other things around supercharging your adoption at scale. So another recommendation I would make is that you focus your efforts on sustainable enablement. And what I mean by sustainable enablement is ensuring that as adoption of the platform grows, that the organisation is prepared at all levels for the increasing volume of users and solutions. So one key to this is getting those foundational components that we went through in the pillars right and aligned to your organisational needs. But from there, you need to shift your focus into upskilling and preparing teams for the future. So some of the kind of key strategies here I would suggest would be your community of practice, which I talked about on the last slide. So it offers that opportunity for peer-to-peer support, which is sustainable because we're not having to put loads more IT effort into doing it. We're just enabling that community in whatever way we can. Around training, so again, just thinking about the different training offers and how people get upskilled, you might want to consider things that can be put into people's what do you call them? Now I can't remember the name, but into people's like annual reviews. So perhaps kind of benchmarking things that people might want to build in as part of their professional development. Hacks can be really useful to supercharge adoption in business areas where people aren't particularly interested in the technology, or they want some more ideas for how they might use the technology, and it can really show them how quickly they can get something up and running, which can be really valuable. It can also help business makers to learn new features, network with others in the development community, which can help kind of widen their view, and then also spread that word and seed that knowledge back into the business. And then finally, my personal favourite at the moment is the fusion team approach. So part of my service offer here has been around setting up like a small works delivery route. So outside of our big expensive IT-led delivery, we've been developing small low-risk applications in a little development team offer that we have. But what we're looking to do now, rather than build those apps that the business could have actually built within the governance model themselves, we're moving to this fusion team approach, where we'll be dropping our developers into business maker teams for set periods of time, so maybe like a day a week over a few months, to help again seed that knowledge back into the business, grow the business knowledge around using the technology and designing solutions on the technology, so that they can get up and running faster and then hopefully take that knowledge forward in their business area. And then the final one on here is using your data. So the Centre of Excellence is full of data, but it's up to you to decide what's useful and valuable and how you want to use it. And so I've got an example here. So a few weeks ago, somebody asked me a few months ago, somebody asked me how many makers we've got on Power Platform, so on Power Apps and Power Automate specifically. So I ran a report and was like, that's weird, we've got like 2,300 makers. That's way more than I thought we had. And then I went in and reran that report to see how many of those people had built more than one app or more than one flow. And actually it turned out that number was only like 350. So we had loads and loads of people who've used the tool once and then either just didn't need anything else or they've walked away, which I think is probably more likely. So now we're going to use that data to survey all those users and find out what they were missing to get them to come back to the platform. So you've got all that data now, so having some kind of reporting strategy or running those regular reports can offer you real value. So moving on to the question we just had. I've got the perfect slide for this one. So some of the biggest challenges we've had along the way, and I'm going to talk through how we've overcome some of them, and some of these are still outstanding, and I'll be completely honest about that. And if there is anyone on the call that's got a solution to any of those outstanding challenges, please give me a shout. So I promised I'd talk.
Emma, just before you get into that, will we just have another question, if that's okay? Sorry for interrupting you. So Power App development is still a software development. Do you consider early adopters of the technology to be only power users or real citizen developers?
Oh, definitely real citizen developers. I mean, there's such a scale, and I'm sure other organizations who've opened up to business makers find the same thing. You know, we've got some people just building pretty basic, like forms-based applications. And then we've got some people who are replacing spreadsheets with like 30 columns on them, and have built quite complex case or task management systems for their teams. So I would call them all, we call them business makers now. We started with the term citizen developers, but I think the term citizen developers doesn't really mean anything to people from outside IT. So we've gone with business makers, but yeah, they're definitely building real useful solutions. Hope that answered the question.
Amazing, thank you, Emma.
So benefits tracking is something I've really wrestled with, and I'm sure other organisations are too. So the guidance on the Microsoft Learn website on this is not especially helpful. So I would recommend thinking about what's important to you and what kind of data you want to gather. It's certainly quite straightforward to gather some of the qualitative benefits around Power Platforms, so things like satisfaction with the product offer and the technical setup. One of the things we've done around governing Power Apps development is that we've got our own registration tool, which is an evolution of the Maker Assessment app, which is part of the starter kit. So anybody building an app has to register with us and tell us what their app does. And as part of that, we capture those qualitative benefits. And our plan now is to follow up on all of those registrations and try and get some cold hard numbers against those. On the other side, with Power Automate, we've built a new benefits tracking solution, which has been live for a couple of weeks now. And essentially what that does is for every Power Automate flow that's over 6 months old, or if it's been modified a month later, we send an adaptive card via Teams to the owner and just simply ask them for a description of the flow if we don't already have it, and how many days, hours, days or hours the flow is saving, or minutes the flow is saving them every month or week. So it gives us some data now against each flow on how much it's saved. There is no flow run data in the COE, so unfortunately you can't trigger it every time the flow is run, but we are now starting to add up those benefits, and we've got a bit of a ballpark now for how much time Power Automate is saving our business makers, which is a game changer because we can now prove how much value the tool set is offering. The next challenge, and this is one that I don't have all the answers to, is around trust. So I picked this lovely example of somebody jumping into a crowd, trusting that they're going to be saved. I've seen that go wrong a few times. I'm sure other people have too. So we're asking the business to self-report on how critical their solutions are. And one of the challenges I came up against in our organisation was even having a definition of what business criticality means. So how we've defined that here is that you could live without something if it went down for 3 days. You can't know if something's critical from the data. You can't even really know how complex the solution is from the data in the starter kit because, for example, someone might have 17 SharePoint lists that they're using as a backend to a Canvas app, which is an absolute nightmare. But in the COE, all you're going to see is that they're using the SharePoint connector. So you can't know everything from the data. So unless your IT teams are vetting everything that's produced, all I can suggest in terms of assuaging this risk as much as possible is doing that continual comms and engagement with your business makers on what they are and aren't allowed to build. So make yourself really hard to ignore and make sure that they're getting that message from every angle possible. The next one is demanding citizen developers, and actually early adopters are kind of the most difficult ones for this. And I picked this picture because I thought this guy was just looking suitably annoyed that he's not getting what he wants. And I've seen that face on a Teams call a few times. So those mature development teams, probably your early adopters or perhaps even business teams that are now employing people with Power Platform skills to build stuff for their business area. They're always going to be asking for more, and especially if the people they've employed are coming from potentially developer backgrounds from other organisations, they're not going to be happy just building things in the lower levels of your governance model. So that has been quite challenging. We do have a working group where we review new features and functionality, and where we can talk about governance as well. So always open to having those conversations. And I think one day in the future, probably the answer to that will be having some kind of hub and spoke model where we do have trusted business teams who meet certain parameters and are able to build things at different levels in the governance model. The next one is reuse. So in a short period of time, we found a lot of duplication in our developer community, so people building very similar solutions over and over again. And there are ways of reducing this with features such as catalog and component libraries, but there's a few gotchas. So for example, for catalog, these are environment specific, so I don't really know how we would deploy that with the current environment strategy we have. So exploring those things at the moment, but I don't necessarily have all the answers. The next one is staying up to date. So I talked earlier about how that cascade of new features just doesn't stop. So I recommend having a role to cover this. So having somebody whose part of their responsibility is tracking all of those updates. And something that I'm aspiring to that I think would be really nice would be having your own organizational product roadmap on your hub site. So those early adopters, those more technical business makers can see that things are coming, and then reduces the amount of questions you've got coming through to IT. I just forgot something else I was going to mention on the duplication one as well, is making that data public on what everybody is building. So I mentioned we've got our registration tool. We've got that report on everything that's been registered also sitting on a Power Platform hub. So you can search and see if someone in your business area or in a different part of the business has already built what you're looking to build. And then finally, model-driven apps. Model-driven apps are challenging for business makers. And the reason why they're challenging is that they are very tricky to govern. And this is not something that is written down anywhere, I don't think, on Microsoft's website, but there's no usage data for model-driven apps available in the Centre of Excellence Starter Kit, and there's no way of getting that usage data. So if your governance model hinges on the number of users that a solution has, you're not going to get that in the COE. You also can't effectively quarantine model-driven apps. So if you're relying on that as a way of automating governance, you also can't do that. So if you are going to allow them for business makers, the governance around that needs some thought. So finally, I better just check the time. Where are we at? We've got 15 minutes still, that's good. Okay, so some of the results we've seen so far here at Defra. So we've now got 3 delivery routes available. So I mentioned that small work / fusion team approach. We've got our IT-led approach, and then we've also got our business maker communities. So we've got lots of clear guidance for them. We've got self-service routes, and we've got support available depending which route they've come down. We've got over 30, I call them portfolio apps, that means an IT-led project live, and we've got loads more in development. So that's both by our in-house team, but we've also got 3 different partners who are developing solutions for us. And part of getting those guys enabled has been around having that clear guidance again, so making sure partners know what our technical strategy is for the platform and how we're using it, so we can get them up and running nice and quickly. We have got over 230 business maker developed applications, and the best thing is we know what they are. So because we've got that registration process in place, so we know what they are and who's doing them, and so do our users, so that information is available to everyone. We've got absolutely tons of flows that have been built by the business, so over 3,500. That has by far been the quickest, the biggest growth area. So we're up 300% year on year on the number of flows on our tenancy. So it is really, really popular. And I think once we enable Copilot for Power Automate later this year, that's going to grow even more, which is great. And then hopefully we can gather more of these benefits around time savings and really continue to prove the value. We've got a really fast growing community, so I've mentioned how important that community of practice approach has been to our adoption strategy. So we're nearly on 900 members now, and it's going up all the time, and we've got about 100-ish showing up for our monthly meetups. So people are really keen to talk about the platform, to find out more, and we're really happy with those figures. And then finally, the one I'm most excited about, we've got some real quantifiable benefits. So far we've had, and this is, like I mentioned, only gone live a couple of weeks ago and we've started small, but we've had reports now back on 43 of the flows that have been developed by business makers, and already we know we're saving over 35 days of full-time employee time a month, which is massive. So we're planning now on building a really nice shiny Power BI dashboard with all of these stats in there, so that all of those stakeholders and sponsors we've got can go in any time and see how beneficial this product's been to our business areas. So that's super exciting. Cool. So finally, the key takeaways from this session. So the things I'd really like you to remember. So first of all, people are the single most important factor in nailing this. So I found you another human pyramid picture to keep in your head. Some cheerleading team now, I think, probably from the 50s or 60s. People are the single most important factor. So not just your stakeholders, but your early adopters. So your stakeholders, your early adopters, keep in mind the business, and also think about that long-term resourcing and the people you're going to need to make this happen, and think about the partners that you might need to bring in to help you with that. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Regularly prioritize what you're looking at to remain as sane as possible. So think about those organization goals, think about the user needs, your stakeholders' needs, and use that to prioritize your work effectively. Unless you've got a huge team, you're not going to be able to look at it all at once. So just think about where you start. I've said it a few times, but this is a product, not a project. So think about that long-term journey for as long as you're using the tools, and not just this initial rollout, if that's where you're at. Focus on sustainable enablement. So focus on enablement and adoption strategies that get people up and running and seed that knowledge out into the business. Don't focus on things where you're doing stuff for them. So think about your comms plan and think about things that you can do to seed that knowledge outwards. And then finally, keep everyone on the bus with comms and engagement, and keep telling them what you've got, keep telling them what's available, keep giving them that guidance, and use those opportunities that you have, whether it's kind of town hall type things or other comms things in your organization that you can piggyback onto to get out there and tell people what's available. And that was my last slide. So I did mention just a couple of things that are in the pack. Sean, will the pack get sent out after the session?
The presentation, is it?
Yeah.
Or, yeah, you can share the slides with me. I can send it out, but the recording will be sent out by email as well.
Yeah. Oh, okay. All right. Well, I'll do that because there's some links in here. I'll just briefly mention them.
Yeah.
Here
you can send it to me afterwards.
Cool. Okay, I will do. I've just got a link to the register for the Dynamics 365 and Power Platform user groups, information about the starter kit and making an environment strategy, the Sprint Zero podcast, which is awesome, blog on our journey, and then the UK cross-government community. And then I've also got a slide at the back with some of the roles you might need to get this, to make this work. So some of the roles that we've thought about, but I didn't have time to go through that slide, which was why I cut it. But hopefully people will still find it useful and it wasn't a waste of time.
Yeah, so thank you, Emma, for a great presentation. So now we'll get into the questions and answers part. Should you wish to ask a question, please feel free to type in the questions box now. Yes, we have a few questions in now, Emma, just let you know.
Cool.
So do you decentralize the creation of the apps or centralize it to department?
Oh, say that again, Sean, sorry.
Do you decentralize the creation of the apps or centralize it to its department?
So decentralized in that the business areas decide what they want to build and go ahead and do it. I guess key things on that as part of the registration process, if a business maker is building an app, we ask them the question of whether they've got senior sponsorship to build what they're building. So making sure that somebody's invested in them spending the time on it today and in the future, and also whether they've got permission to use the data and to do things with the data. So we've decentralized that, but we've built in those responsible questions that our business sponsors wanted us to ask in order to make sure they're doing things they should be. Oh, the sun's come out at the perfect moment, sorry.
Yeah, okay.
There we go. So hopefully that answered that one.
Perfect. So just the next one there, Emma, is, hello, Emma. Thanks for your presentation. I'd like to ask that, is there any different suggestion for being at the adaptation or scaling methods, important points, etc. As a person who will be on the wheel of a power platform business, what can be the suggestions for one who wants to do a power platform business in a strong standards?
Oh, I'm not sure I understand that question, Sean. Sorry. Can you drop it in?
I don't know if you'll be able to see it.
Oh, okay.
Do you want me to read it out again, or I'll see if I can put it in the chat for you. I don't know if you can see it there. Can you see it in the chat?
Yeah, got it. Okay, no, that's perfect. Is there any different suggestion for being better at the adaptation or scaling methods? The wheel of a power. I'm not sure I understand. The person who'll be on the wheel of a power platform business. One who wants to do a power platform business and strong standards. Can I ask the person that asked the question to message me on LinkedIn and we can have a chat about that, because I'm not sure I understand the actual nugget that they're after with that one. What can be the suggestions for one who wants to do a power platform business in strong standards? No, keep reading it, but not getting any further with it. Sorry.
No problem. So just next question there is how to deal with finance controlling guys. They do not consider the processes enhanced with Power Platform. They just see cash out, so many premium licenses, etc. Any hint, suggestion how to deal with that?
So I think that one comes down to the benefits tracking piece and to having those KPIs and reporting on those. So I guess kind of key things would be, because the licenses are really expensive, and I'm sure depending on the size of your organisation there will definitely be some negotiation to be done on those. But what I would say is that having those quantifiable benefits makes all the difference. So being able to prove the value of what you're doing will make all the difference. So if you can get that up and running quicker than I did, as everybody knows now from my presentation, that's taken us nearly 3 years to get that in place. If you can start showing those benefits sooner, that can make a real difference. Some of the other KPIs that I think are quite useful to pull together, depending on how long these things take your organisation at the moment, are the time to delivery. So if you can prove, for example, those IT-led projects, if they're taking 3 months to deliver instead of a year, by building something bespoke or perhaps procuring something off the shelf, that can make a real difference, and you can prove the cost behind having those teams up and running for that extra time. So having some of those metrics together will hopefully help the finance people to see where the value is.
Amazing. Thank you, Emma. So just the next one there is, how on earth do you govern all these flows? Do you have any catalog of what data they're using and whether it contain personally identifiable information?
Do we have any what? Just read the last one.
It contain personally identifiable information.
So I guess some of that comes back to your internal kind of data handling policies. In government, we've got lots of training around anybody that's responsible for anybody who's responsible for data. So we expect them to have that same responsibility with data that they would in any other tool set. And I guess like this is one of those challenges I've heard from people in security and things like that, but really holding that data in Dataverse, for example, versus having it in a spreadsheet it's loads more secure than it was before. And yes, you do have a risk of people moving data around, but if they've been through that training and they're responsible for that data, you hope that they would be applying those same principles. And then obviously on the technology side, you've got your DLP policy to control which connectors can and can't be used, and then hopefully your tenant isolation to make sure things are staying in the tenancy. So there's a few things you can do. It's not completely watertight, in that you could still be showing people data that they're not supposed to see if you've not got your security set up right on your data source. But I would say generally educating and putting that onus on the developer hopefully will help us assuage those concerns.
Perfect. So the next question there is, how do you manage different Power Platform environments? Which roles do you have in the environments?
That's a very current question here at Defra, because we are just reviewing our approach to security roles, and I think probably what we're going to end up is with more custom roles. So how I would recommend you approach that is by thinking about the different user personas you've got, so the different types of user you have using Power Platform, and then what the needs are under each of those user personas, and then looking at the off-the-shelf security roles and which ones suit what. So an example, I think as a minimum, if you're allowing business makers to use Dataverse, you've probably got 4 personas. You've got an app user, so that's someone that just needs to go in and use an app in an environment, but they don't need to see the environment when they go to make.powerapps.com. You've got your business makers, so your standard business makers. You're probably going to have another role for business makers that use Dataverse because they need different permissions to build and edit tables. And then you're probably going to have your IT-led project makers who are going to probably need slightly elevated permissions because they're probably going to have dedicated environments and maybe pipelines in place. So yeah, I'd recommend taking those user personas, thinking about their needs, and then looking at the off-the-shelf roles and if any of those are going to suit, and otherwise looking at customizing them.
Emma, we have a lot of questions in. Is it okay if they message you after directly, if that's okay? We just don't have time for all the questions. Anyone who has questions, who put them in, could you please directly message Emma and she'll get to them. Thanks, Emma. Appreciate that.
Not at all. Thanks so much to everyone that joined today.
Perfect. So on behalf of the ESB community, we'd like to extend a big thank you again to Emma for taking time out today to carry this webinar. We really appreciate it. So that's the end of today's webinar. You can find this webinar and more at sharepointeurope.com/resource center. Thanks again for all of you joining us today, and I hope you join us again soon. Take care.